I'm going to begin here because I've got 4 pages of just scriptures we're going to go through tonight. So get your Bibles out. We're going to do a lot of reading tonight, which I know you want to do. But we are going to really start to wrap things up here over the last couple class periods. And I always try to remind us that the goal here is that we are looking at scenes of Jesus' life and his interaction with people or his decision-making, and trying to attach that to something that we can, on an everyday basis, learn from. That's not easy sometimes. It's because we see his behaviors as so special and almost miraculous. But as we've been talking about, he very intentionally performed behaviors that were modeling what God expects of us. And so we're going to continue to do that. And I appreciate you letting me kind of approach it this way. When Wes assigned me this topic, I suspect that I'm approaching it the exact opposite way that he intended for me to. And that's mainly because I don't want Wes telling me what to do. But I really did, I think, as I started to look at this, I tried to start with the idea of, okay, you encounter a particular situation. What would Jesus do? And I found I struggled with it. And maybe you wouldn't, but I did. And I just decided, I thought maybe the best thing I could do is just go here, just look at what he did and be inspired by it, and help us all be inspired by that. So we're going to look tonight starting in Matthew 26, and we're going to look at really just the last hours of Jesus' life and the interactions that he had with people, and look at how, as we mentioned before, very intentionally Jesus was performing behaviors, interacting with people and doing things that were designed to show God's plan. And as we talked about last time, it was intended not just to show God's plan for how we should behave, but it was intended to be a construct of exactly how God saves us and what the outcomes of salvation are. And so we looked at that last time. But we're now going to look at the final moments of Jesus' life and how he behaved and try to learn from that. Let's bow and pray, and then we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for our blessings. We're thankful that we can be together tonight and we can study your word. We're thankful that you've let your will be known to us. We ask that you would help us to honor it and honor you. We're thankful that you love us so much that even though we fail, even though we are sinners, that you gave your only Son so that we could have salvation, that we could live eternally. We are thankful to you. We are thankful to Jesus Christ for his perfect example. We'd ask that you would help us as we live our daily lives, that we would remember these things and that we would see Jesus, and that we would, in our responses and in our behaviors, that we would act as he does. We pray all these things in his name, and amen. So we last time tried to kind of make this connection of all of these things we saw Jesus doing and how he demonstrated so perfectly what God expects of us, and that we saw that he was humble, that he was showing compassion. He responded with compassion just so perfectly, that he responded with patience, and that he always acted with patience, that he ensured justice in lots of different situations with people and with the things that God had established. He forgave every opportunity that he could, and that he perhaps was defined by mercifulness, and that he saw people that not only mistreated him, but people who made mistakes, people who sinned, and that he just reached out to relieve their burdens. And that's what I'm trying to make sure we connect that to, is those were his behaviors. And what he was intending to do was relieve people of pain and burden, of hopelessness, that he was trying to create joy and bring joy to people, make them have a life of happiness. He wanted to bring peace between people, that everything he did was intended to do that, and to elicit confidence, that he wanted people to feel saved. And I will say, I have struggled with that. We talked about that last time. I've struggled with that a lot. I'm sure you have. That it's hard sometimes for us, even though we are in Christ, to feel saved. Sometimes our inclination is to be hard on ourselves and always feel lost, and then we're always grappling for salvation. But Jesus came to bring relief, to bring that confidence. So I want to go through, and I am going to go about this in a strange way because we're really going to skip some of the most, I think, we're going to go through these last days of Christ, or these last hours even of Christ, We're not going to necessarily go through this and study every single thing that happened. We're not going to tell that story tonight. I want to take vignettes from that where he interacted with people. And so forgive me, but we are going to skip some of the most important things here. But I want to make sure we touch on and have time to touch on these times in which Jesus had to act and make decisions and things that we can learn from. I suspect everyone here will be able to fill in the gaps of what's happening between these. But we'll start in Matthew 26 and verse 14. Wanted to touch on this because it comes back again as we go through these scenarios, that it says in verse 14, then one of the 12 named Judas Iscariot went to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me to betray him to you? And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver to him. From then on, he began looking for a good opportunity to betray Jesus. So I think you know where we're going with this, that we now see, we have recorded this scene in which Judas seeks to betray Jesus. What was his motivation? It was straight up, I almost can't even think of another motivation. That he wanted or needed money, desperate for money, so he went there, and when they offered him 30 pieces of silver, he took it, and it says his mission was then to find an opportunity to betray Jesus. I will say this, do we live in a society where money makes people do crazy things? It may be the thing that makes people act the craziest. That, you look at people who are in prison, people who have committed murders or done things in businesses that were atrocious, mistreated people. It's a pretty good guess that it somehow comes back to money, either greed or desperation. And so we see Judas acting in this way. Then we see that all the disciples are together. Obviously, a lot has happened here now, but now all the disciples are together, we know, and they're going to partake of the Passover together. And so you see in verse 20 that they are together, and it says Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples, and they were eating, and he said, truly I say to you that one of you will betray me. Being deeply grieved, they each one began to say to him, surely not I, Lord. And he answered, he who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me. So they all sit around, and Jesus just says it to them right there. One of you will betray me. Who was he talking to? He was really just bringing this up to them to say that. And they were all just defiant. It says they were deeply grieved. What do you get from that? What was their reaction when he said, one of you will betray me? Yeah, who in the world would do that? How else would you describe their reaction to him? Incredulous? That's a good word for it. They reacted with, oh no. This wasn't going good. It's like we're going along here. We're doing these amazing things. We seem to be on a mission, and they hear this that one of us, and each of them then takes it very personally. Wait, it's not me. Certainly not me. They seem to understand that he has insight, and they say, it can't be me, right? Certainly not I. He says, he who dipped his hand in the bowl is the one who will betray me. Sometimes I think people, this is once again, we talked last time about making a movie about all this, that it was like, oh, Judas, they bumped hands while they were, but I don't think he was really trying to specifically identify. He was saying, one of us sitting here eating together and dipping together. And then there's a very specific, I think, reference here to Psalm 41, where it talks about, that he will be betrayed by a friend, by one that he dips bread with. He's referring to that and saying, this is people with an intimate relationship now, this close friendship, and one of them will betray him. Yes, please, Mark.
The disciples also, there's a lot that they don't understand. We also know that Jesus told Peter that he would not deny him 3 times, and that he's going to go die, he's going to be killed, and they're like, what? How can this even happen?
This can't be the end of this, yeah.
One more thing. One
yeah.
of them is going to be true. I really wonder if they're like,
yeah.
could it be? If I can deny him 3 times, am I going to betray him? I just don't think they.
Yeah, and we see even, and we see even scenes where he has reprimanded them, and but in this case they think, because the idea of betrayal, this is not just, he doesn't say one of you will fail me. He doesn't say one of you will fall away, or he says one of you will betray me. What is that? What's the idea of betrayal? What's that concept? totally turning on a person. The idea of betrayal is a person who you trust, and you expect is working for your good, is actually harming. It is not just the idea of a friend that made a mistake, or the idea of a friend who did something that cost you money. This is a person who has turned and is actively, what's the most common phrase about a betrayal? We call it what? Stabbing in the back. That's a pretty good picture of the idea that says, I am attempting to harm you when you think that I am loving you and trying to be good to you. And so the Son of Man is to go, just as it is written of him, but woe to that man to whom the Son of Man is betrayed, by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. We find out that really to be the case. That we're not going to study that here, but Judas's reaction to that is what? When he recognizes what he's done, is that he is distraught. He tries to give the money back and takes his own life. Yes, sir. Are we capable of betraying Jesus? We can turn our back on him. We can do harm. So this is something where I don't know that I was particularly thinking that what we learn from this is not to betray Jesus, but that to me is a given. But the idea that you say there is that we can disown Jesus. We can turn our back on him. And there are people who that do active harm to his cause, and that there's a consequence to that. So he says that it would be better if that man had not been born, and it says in verse 25, and Judas, who was betraying him, by the way, it's not saying that he was going to betray him. He was in the process of betraying him. Says, surely it is not I, Rabbi. And Jesus said to him, you've said it yourself. Was Judas asking sincerely? I think this whole thing was Jesus making sure he knew, I know what's going on here. You have to think that when Jesus brought this up at the table, Judas's blood ran cold. That he thought, oh no. He thought he had been sneaking around, but he knew, and Jesus made sure he knew it. We'll see another scene here in a moment with Peter that I think is maybe similar, and where Jesus just wants to let him know that he knows. And we could ask the question, this is maybe an unanswerable question, but why didn't Jesus take him aside and say, don't do this? Don't do this. This is, because he loved these people. He loved them. But I think if we knew someone was in the process of doing something to hurt us, we might go to them and say, please don't. Were you going to say something, sir?
The reason he didn't was because he knew what he had to do and no way to get out, even though later on he asked him if he could.
And we'll see that here in a second, that we'll see here as he goes through, he knew the fate. He knew where this was going, but he was going to make sure that he still acted honorably, that he acted patiently and lovingly. He could have done something to humiliate Judas at this moment, or exhibited some anger toward him, certainly justified, but instead he just knew where this was going. But he did want to know. And I think it seems to me to be sly of Jesus just to say quietly, you said it. Yes, James. So he recognized, he recognized this. I mean, we knew, I don't know what Jesus knew about it, that perhaps Jesus already knew he was greedy. He was stealing already. He already knew that it was in his heart, so he was not going to change it. It was already in motion. Although, could Judas have stopped it at this point? Yeah, we see how it went down, and he could have just not done it. So, once again, I know we're skipping around here a little bit, but they then leave and go out, it says, to the Mount of Olives. And then in verse 31, it says, Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered." Once again, how do you think they took this? For him to say to his disciples, who literally had left everything, dedicated themselves to his purpose, and he says, "You will all fall away because of me this night." Hard thing to hear, I suspect. But it was prophesied. "But after I've been raised, I will go ahead to Galilee." But Peter said to him, "Even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly, I say to you that this very night, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same thing too. We always skip that little last piece there. That Peter made this commitment. I think Peter always was the one who spoke up and always, he was impetuous perhaps. All the rest of them were like, "Yeah, me too. Yeah, none of us will either." Though he said, "All of you will. All of you will." And Peter makes this commitment. There's something to learn here, I think, not necessarily from Jesus' behavior, but from Peter's erroneous actions here. That this idea of us not understanding perhaps in the moment how strong a temptation can be, us being overconfident about maybe an influence, being overconfident. Even when we talk about in Galatians, when it talks about restoring someone and bearing a burden of another, it says, do that in a way so that you are careful, so that you don't also fall into it. And so this idea that what Peter's doing here is he's saying, I will never fall away from you. I will never deny you. And I wonder if sometimes we feel that way, that we think nothing would ever make me question or deny or doubt or anything, but it's because we do that in a moment of comfort and painlessness. And so I think it is something we can think about, that things can get really hard, things can get really dark, pain can be really bad, and we have to be ready for those moments, and we have to know we can't be overconfident about how we feel about these things. Yes, sir.
Someone said, if I knew where I was going to die, I would never go near the place.
Yeah, exactly.
And remember, God knows everything. He knew everything that was awaiting him, and he did it anyway.
And we see that. So as we now go into the garden, so you've led us right to that, where now he is facing the moment. And I taught a class on this years ago about the final week of Christ, and I was surprised, even as I taught it, that you talk about the final week of Christ, about 75% of what we know about it happens in the last 12 hours. And maybe in some of it in the last 6 hours. That all of these scenes of Jesus leading up to this starts in Bethany. This was back when he was at Mary and Martha's, was 6 days before this. But now we are just hours. So he has these conversations, and then they go out to the garden and he prays, and then he gets arrested, and then he goes through trials before daylight. So that's what's coming up for him, and he knows it is that imminent. Yes, Les?
Maybe sometimes we are guilty when we have a great opportunity to speak up for Jesus.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to talk about that in a minute. The idea that there are times in which it's not necessarily that we say the wrong thing. Sometimes it is that we stay silent when we should have said something. And so I think it's an important point to make, that it's not always that we just are avoiding doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it is that we have an opportunity that we deny, or that we don't. And so Jesus, we see all these times where he did the hard thing, even though it was hard, when he could have maybe just stepped back and maybe could have stayed quiet. So he says to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me. And Peter doubles down. If I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said that. So we'll take now a step now to where Jesus goes into the garden. Once again, I'm going to really gloss over this, and so apologies. This is obviously an amazing set of passages, very useful. But I want to look just at a couple things here about and walk through this quickly about his behavior in the garden. So he goes into the garden, and he brings in really just his inner circle of his closest disciples, and he tells them to sit here while I go pray. And he brings his disciples there, and then he takes his closest disciples in with him. And he says, and it says, and he began to be grieved and distressed. And then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. So he brings them there, these sons of Zebedee, it says, these closest friends to him. And he says, remain here and watch while I go in. Why did he bring them? Why bring these? Because he could have just left them there at the table at the Passover and gone out to pray. He could have gone into the garden and just walked out by himself. Why bring them? Yes?
One possibility, it says he was very sorrowful. He probably was needed some friends and company.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to see that there was, clearly they completely failed in any spiritual purpose that he brought them for. Perhaps there was just this personal, I want people there. Yes, please.
Perhaps as a witness. He actually said that no one can deny what.
So one is he needed some people there, and so he wanted some people there just to take part in it and be witnesses to it. So yes, absolutely. We see, what does he ask them to do? Keep watch. So it could be that it was the idea of them wanting to see it, and also he needed to kind of have an alert. He needed to know when this was going to go down. He knew what was coming. And so, but I think it was all of those things. But I believe that there's a lot of this that has to do with him just wanting to have people there because this was the most distressing moment of his entire life. That what he was doing and these things he knew were coming it says, he was grieved and deeply distressed. The idea of being grieved is mourning, is that I am literally mourning like a death has occurred and maybe it hasn't. He needed comfort. He needed someone to watch out. And it says he went behind them and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. It says that he prayed that multiple times. And do you think that he thought that could happen? Do you think he thought that could happen? That cup would pass from him? I'm asking a question that we don't know. Everyone seems to be saying no, that it could not happen. And by the way, I think the answer is that it couldn't happen. Clearly, it was not something that could happen as part of God's plan. Do you think that he hoped it could? I feel like that there's this part of him that was saying, is there any other way here? Because I know what I'm about to step into. Yes, please go ahead.
I think what we can draw from this above everything else, he is God, but he's also man.
Yeah, he's...
Man is someone that worries about stuff like that. Okay? He knew what he was facing better than we do because he could actually experience it.
Do you know people that you consider to be emotional wrecks, that are people that are just, that their emotions are always outward and they just always are anger, sadness, and do you know other people who almost never show emotion? Do you think that the person who never shows emotion never feels emotion? And I think that sometimes we think that Jesus, because he knew so much, because he handled situations so calmly and with such grace, that he didn't have this extremely tempting emotion stir in him. And this just says he was grieved and deeply distressed. I think what that meant was, as a human, he was just on the edge of losing it, like just absolutely emotional to the point of not being able to almost stand it. Yes?
Don't you think the fact that he asked God to breathe, that was what tells you really?
Yeah, I tend to think, and this, once again, I don't know, but this is the plan that had to happen. It had to happen. This was not optional. But I believe he asked his Father, maybe this in a similar way that he was begged by people who asked to heal them and raise people from the dead, that they begged him. Maybe he just begged the Father, please let this cup pass from me. But if this is the way it has to happen, this is the way it's going to happen. He made that very clear. But he was fearful. He knew the pain and agony that was about to come, and he asked for that. Now, he kept coming back and finding his closest disciples there, and what did he find them doing every time? Sleeping. It just says because they were sleepy. That was they fell asleep because they were sleepy, and I thought that it was telling that he just says to them, are you still sleeping and resting? But behold, the hour is at hand. They were supposed to be keeping watch, and he had to come to them and tell them, you're still sleeping. In fact, he back in verse 40, could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Could you not just stay awake for an hour? And just their being there would have helped him, but they could not do it. And he said, get up, it's time. The time is here. Let's continue on for sake of time. John 18, let's move over to John 18. I wanted to look at this scene from the garden, from that depiction, just because it gives a little bit of more of this interaction. So while he's in the garden, it says, Judas, who was in verse 2, Judas who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. He knew where they would go on a night like this. And it says, Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, who do you seek? He faced it up. Is it a fair question to say, why didn't they run? A Roman cohort coming up, just a ridiculous military might coming to arrest a man with no weapons, although one of them had a weapon at least. Oh no, I know he took it. So the idea thereof, these were just men. They came and you think, why they just could have run? Why not run? Why not defend themselves? And we kind of answered that already, that he was on a path. He knew what had to be done. He had asked the Father. The answer was, no, this cup cannot pass away. And so what he does is, he just faces up to it. He didn't cower away. He didn't make them drag him off. He didn't make a scene of an emotional reaction. He resigned himself to it, and he walked up to them and said, who do you seek? They said, Jesus the Nazarene, and he said, I'm he. He didn't need to be elusive. I think this scene, we see him being very, just standing up and being strong here, but I don't think this distress one had gone away. I don't think that this is probably the height of it, as he knew they're about to take me away, and this process will begin even tonight. What happened when he said, I am he? I always love this part of it. They said, we're looking for Jesus the Nazarene. He said, I am he. And then what did they do? They fell back. That just his presence, the way he was responding to them, his divinity, whatever it is, they were just knocked over by it. It was that his presence was so strong. And it says he asked them again, who do you seek? They said, Jesus the Nazarene. He said, I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. And he said to fulfill the word. This was to fulfill the word which he spoke. Of those whom you have given me, I have lost not one. So he basically said, I'm the one you need, take me. Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. And we know that Jesus was having none of that. Peter, once again, wanted to defend, and Jesus said no, healed the man, and said, put the sword into the sheath, the cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it? I have to do this, he says. I have to do this. We can start swinging swords, we will lose, but that's not what we're going to do here. So, let's continue on, just for sake of time. I think you can see here how Jesus, not only does he react to his friends who are doing him wrong, who are failing him, he shows them mercy. Even the one he knows that will betray him to his death, he lets him do it, and he demonstrates some manner of respect to him. Whenever it's time and he knows that what has to happen, he just steps up to it, and as bravely as a person can, just says, I'm the one you need, and you can take me. Yes, Philip. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, remember we said the idea of that he said that he would not lose one, that this was his to do. He had to make sure that they didn't start swinging swords at his disciples. He said, let these go. And so he did. He really did. In this case, I think Peter could have had it a lot worse. Yes, please.
That's the possibility. The first time he said, "Who are you seeking?" And he said, "I am he," and they fell down. Okay, that might have been the reason why he said to them the second time, "Who are you seeking?" And they were more respectful. And then he said, "If it's me you're seeking, let these go this way." So that might have been a
Yeah.
loose.
The opportunity to let them go. But yeah, I mean, they clearly, these soldiers had come maybe with a lot of bravado, but they learned some humility as soon as they walked up. So Jesus now is arrested and alone and taken. And now these scenes in which we will go through these fairly quickly. Now these scenes in which Jesus now is bound and taken. Now it becomes something, and for us, for Christians, it's hard to hear. It's hard to hear about a Savior that is now treated this way. Yes, please.
For the most part of Jesus' journey, he showed divine things, healing, turning water into wine, the lame, the blind. He showed divine things, but this last week of his life, he showed truly human characteristics.
If you couldn't hear that this idea that he showed his divinity in these healings and in these opportunities to show power, but now he submits and he shows, and now he responds to all these things as a human. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels, he had the ability to blow this whole plan up, but he submitted to it, and then just took all of the things that a human has to endure in the process of being betrayed, mistreated, tortured, and murdered. The first thing, I'll go back to Luke 22, or go over to Luke 22, because now we see as he has been captured, I don't know if you can really call it captured, he just gave himself to them. What's that? Yeah, I mean, he really just submitted to this. But in Luke 22 and verse 63, it says, "Now men were holding Jesus in custody, were mocking him and beating him. They blindfolded him and were asking him, 'Prophesy, who was the one who hit you?' And they were saying many other things against him, blaspheming." So blaspheming his Father, and just how disrespectful for them to just be beating him and saying, "Hey, prophet, prophesy who just hit you." Just so disrespectful of him. He goes before the Sanhedrin in verse 66. "When it was the day, the council of elders of the people assembled, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to the council chamber, saying, 'If you are the Christ, tell us.' But he said to them, 'If I tell you, you will not believe. If I ask a question, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God.' And they all said to him, 'Are you the Son of God then?' And he said to them, 'Yes, I am.' They said, 'What further need do we have of testimony? For we've heard it from ourselves from his own mouth.'" So this is interesting to me that this depiction in Luke 22, they go to him and they ask him first a question. "If you are the Christ, tell us." And he says, "If I do, you won't believe it." And he even tells them, he kind of connects himself with this being the Son of Man seated at the right hand of God. But then they say, "So are you the Son of God?" And his answer could not be more straightforward. He says, "Yes, I am." And they just said, "Well, what else do we need? A blasphemer." We see that it was not that straightforward. As hard as they tried, they could not seem to get the testimony and the conviction that they needed. Back to Matthew 26, if you don't mind. We'll keep moving quickly here. Yes.
When God sent Moses back to Pharaoh, Moses said, "Who should I say sent me?" And God says, "I am who I am."
Yeah.
And so all through this, I am he. Right when you say I am,
Yeah, the connection to God.
I am phrase.
Yeah.
And I think the chief priests and Pharisees, they may make that connection.
They know that I suspect he wanted them to. But yeah, I love the idea that God doesn't say who he is. He is that, there is, we all identify ourselves and I say, I'm Todd, to try to connect who am I? God doesn't have to do that. He is. So Matthew 26, in verse 67, we see another depiction of how they treated him. They spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, you Christ, who is the one who hit you. So this is that other depiction of that scene. And they add in there that they spit in his face and slapped him. I don't know if you've ever been slapped before by a person, by a malicious person. I have not, but because I would just run away if somebody gets mad. But getting slapped in the face, it's just an affront to slap a person with your hand or to spit in somebody's face. It could not be more disrespectful. And so as this is going on, Jesus has been arrested, and clearly there's some way that he's going through. It's not like they went inside and closed the doors necessarily. Clearly there's something going on with him as he goes through these trials where people are all gathered around in the courtyard, and there is some visibility about what's going on here. And so Peter is there and is followed, and it says he's in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, you too were with Jesus the Galilean. This is verse 69. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you're talking about. When he had gone out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath, I do not know the man. A little later, a bystander came up and said to Peter, surely you too are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away. Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed. And so Peter, with all of his confidence that he had before, said, I will die with you if I have to. I will never betray you. He had said this more than once to Jesus. Kept digging in that I will never betray you. And all it took was a little girl saying, didn't I see you with them? For him to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Wait, weren't you? And the other one, I think it's interesting that he's with people and the other girl comes up and says, hey, this guy was with Jesus of Nazareth. Once again, it says with an oath, I swear to you, I do not know him. And then they hear him talking, because I have a feeling Peter just never stopped talking. And so he was talking, and they recognized his accent. Like I tell people, I don't have much of an accent. Maybe you disagree, but I'm from Texas. But in Florida, I don't have much of an accent. But when I go up to Philadelphia or New York City or Minnesota, people think that I'm a hick from the sticks. That they immediately hear my voice and go, where are you from? And you think about the people who have the deep accents. I get the feeling that he has this accent where they're like, this is a Galilean. We know, of course you're with Jesus. Y'all all sound the same. And his answer was, I do not just I wasn't with him, I don't know the man. Yes, but...
It makes you wonder why there are a fire and all these people in the courtyard in the beginning.
Well, I suspect, by the way, this was basically the dead middle of the night. And I think this was a big deal that was going on. I think that this was, first of all, a place, I think that, you think about New York City and it's, the city that never sleeps. And I think that there's always something stirring, but this was a big deal what was going on and that this was happening. And so I think people were very interested in it. And so Peter put himself right in the middle of it. Yes?
I think maybe sometimes it's about, it's easy to die for a cause that you understand and that where you look good. And I think that's kind of where Peter was here. And I think Jesus was making reference to that when he was praying in the garden. Like, look, I know I have to die, but this way,
Yeah.
this is going to be horrible. And what Jesus was telling his apostles is, you're going to have to take up your cross and follow me too. That's not the glorious way to die. And I think Peter's mind was just, I tried to prove that I would die for him, and
He wanted something valiant. He wanted something heroic. Yeah, and it goes back to what Peter said when Jesus got down and washed their feet. He kneeled down and started washing their feet, and I think it was the same thing. Wait a second. Our Savior, our Messiah is on the ground washing feet. It's almost, you never wash, you're not going to wash my feet. I think it's the same thing. And it's almost that question. I think it has to be in their minds. Is this the kind of kingdom we're building here? Is one where our Savior is murdered and tortured, one where people get down and wash feet. And so I think it's an important point to make that he just was not connecting it. Yes, sir.
Our speech should betray us as well.
Yeah, okay, so he says that our speech should... He turned. Yeah, and so the idea that he said that maybe our speech should deny us. Maybe it is that when people hear us talk, they should say the same thing. Aren't you with Jesus? Well, this is one of those people that's with Jesus. Yeah, a sect. Yeah. It's like, aren't you part of that weird sect of people that follows Jesus? So yeah, this idea that he was identified and connected, and I think this poignant moment where he denied him the third time, and it said immediately a rooster crowed, and it hit him. Because you can't, I've been on a property before where there was a rooster, and they are exhausting. If you ever lived on a farm, or if you ever, like in Hawaii, I've been there, and they have roosters. It's just the most annoying screech, and you can't deny it. And he did that, and immediately he heard it. And what does Luke 22 say happens when he did this? Well, before that, what happened? What did Jesus do? He turned, and I'm going to look at Brian over here. He turned and looked at him when that happened. And Jesus, this idea of Peter just burst into tears. That it's just like, when that happened, you have to think that, I talked a big game. I really told him what I was going to do, and then I just cursed and told someone. I guaranteed them I didn't even know the man. And the rooster crowed, and Jesus just looked at him. And I'd like you to think about this, because I'd like to begin the next class with some of these questions. What does this teach us about how we deal with friends who let us down? Do you have friends, even people that you just love and that you adore, but they always kind of seem to drop the ball on you and let you down? Do you have family members who you love and adore and would die for, but they always seem to drop the ball on you? And I want to ask that question as we start class next time, because we know that later on Jesus sat with Peter and told him, feed my lambs. He sat with him and gave him this opportunity to reconcile. So we'll ask that question at the beginning of next class to you, that when you have people who let you down, people you love that maybe do you wrong or maybe even betray you, what does Jesus teach us about how we deal with that situation? Because in this case, all he did was look. And I suspect that he didn't dig in or give him I told you so. This opportunity was not for Jesus to inflict pain. It was just to make sure Peter knew that he knew. Just like with Judas pretended like he didn't know and said, it's not I, Rabbi, is it? Jesus just said, you said it. Yes?
God, it's ironic. Up to this time, it's his own people, the Jews, who are slapping and spitting and betraying.
It is his own people. He is literally so alone in this, that when he said that all of you will fall away this night because of me, it's happening. That they have just scattered because you got Romans with swords coming, and your life is in danger now. It changes the way you behave. So we're going to start next time here. We're going to look at Jesus before Pilate. We're going to look at him as he's on the cross and how he behaved there. And then we're going to connect this to what God expects of us when we are recipients of evil, when we are treated in ways because of God or even not because of God, when we are treated ways that are evil and hurtful and betrayal, when people let us down and they fail us. God, in many different ways, tells us how we connect that. So thank you for your input tonight. We'll continue this on Wednesday.